So we're going to be dealing with nested schemas in this workshop, meaning that, there's a similar structure for all of these in that a restaurant is going to have a nested schema for a place, an activity is going to have a nested schema for a place, and a hotel is going to have a nested schema for a place. And that place data is going to give you an address as well as latitude and longitude coordinates. So we haven't really done anything with nested schemas before, and there's been some changes to how Mongoose ends up handling nested schemas. That's why, which is a little bit different from what's in the workshop. These are, again, somewhat recent changes in the sense that, the last time I did the cohort, you had to handle nested schemas in a different way. Now it's a little bit more flexible, and I want you to take advantage of that. And again, this is one of those things where, it's great if a workshop is totally up to date with the latest, but, this is not the way the real world works. When you're learning something, you'll end up, reading something or seeing a tutorial, and by the time you end up going in and actually implementing something, things might be different, and that's going to happen. And so, it's going to happen a little bit with this workshop, which I think is good. I think it's good that you get used to that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a directory, and I'm going to call this the foo bar, and I'm going to go into it. And what I'm going to hope happens here, I'm going to open up my Vim, and I'm going to do this through the magic of testing here. So what I expect to happen, we'll sort of start off with a little bit of test-driven development. I'm going to create a directory called test. Delete that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this foo.model spec.js. And here's what I expect to have happen. So what my expectation is that I'm going to describe, I'll say I'm going to describe a nested schema. And so how am I going to describe a nested schema? This is probably a little bit more than you would write for test-driven development, but some of these things we've done already, so let's actually require try expect. And what I expect to have happen is I'm going to do before each. I'll say, what do I expect? Schema can be nested. So let's pretend that we have this foo object, and a foo is going to have a nested bar in it. And what I mean by that is that, let's do before each. And in our before each, I expect to be able to do something like this. I expect to say foo equals new foo. And within foo, just for kicks, I'll set sort of a silly property for the name it prof. And I'm also going to do this nested object, which is going to be a bar. And a bar, let's say, just for kicks, is going to have a count of 1. So what I'm planning on doing here is I'm planning on saving this, and I'm going to say foo.save. I'll get a then. And I'm going to put a function here. All right, this is going to be my promise, and assuming it's saved correctly, I'm going to get a foo back. I'm going to do this with an underscore here, although it really probably wouldn't even make that much of a difference. In fact, we could probably even avoid that by doing this. Our foo ends up getting saved, and let's actually just put a done in here. So again, this is the only thing that's different here is that we haven't done anything with nested schemas before. So let's just do a couple of quick expectations here. Let's say that we expect that we're going to have foo dot name to equal prof. And if this is nested correctly, we're going to say we expect foo dot bar dot count to equal 1. Now, let's actually do a couple of installation of what we need here. We're going to need npm install. We're going to need Mocha. We're going to need chai. These are going to be dev dependencies. And I'm also going to end up needing Mongoose, and I'm going to bring in the Bluebird library for a promise library. So I'm going to say npm install, and this is going to be Mongoose, and this is going to be Bluebird, and for these I'm going to say save. And remind me also, well, I can't remind me because this is on a lecture, but I'm going to also show you guys how you could do some continuous integration by pushing this up to GitHub and actually setting things up so you can run your tests remotely, which is nice. Nice thing to be able to do on a project. So when people check their stuff in, you can know that their code is working. So if I end up going in here and I say /node modules, and this is Mocha bin Mocha, and I run it, node modules, and you know why that happens? That happens because I didn't do npm init. So I'm just going to have to run through these things again, which is my installation. Here's Mongoose Bluebird. So yeah, if you don't end up doing the init, I don't think it really can save it locally because it doesn't know really where to put those entries. So let's do this. That's something I could have checked too if I went back here. Here's my node modules folder, and let's try this again. Okay, so foo's not defined, so let's actually go through this process. And one of the things that I like to do, you've seen me do it before, and you'll get used to it, is I'm going to do something like this. I call this DB instead of models, and I'm going to go up one level and grab DB. And before I end up doing anything here, and if you do before each, they'll be executed one before the other. So it's perfectly legitimate to do. And what I hope to do when I come in here is to say db connect to make sure that I'm connected to the database. And then I'm going to do a then. And I'll put my done in here. And it'll be done. Now, obviously, this functionality doesn't exist. This is what I'm going to build. The other thing that I'm going to do here is to say foo equals db.models foo. And we could actually get this built pretty quickly here. I'm going to save this. And let's open this up a little bit so you can see a little better. So one thing that's not going to like here is that I'm going to put this over here. Here's my foo, and I'm basically just creating it over here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. I'm going to create a folder called DB. I'm going to add index to it, and I'm going to need my Mongoose. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say I have Mongoose, and let's set up what my exports are going to be. So I know I need to have a connection object here. So I need to be able to connect. This is going to point to my function called connect. And my models are going to be an object, foo, and this is going to be foo. So let's actually create these things here. We know we're going to need a function to connect. We also need to go in here. I'm going to need my Bluebird promise library. This is a couple of steps, again, a little bit more than TDD, but again, we've seen this stuff before. So when I go to connect, what I'm going to do is that I only need to connect once. So I'm going to create this variable called connection, C-O-N-N. And when I go to connect, I'll say, hey, look, if this exists already, I'm fine. I'm just going to return it. Now, this is going to need to be a promise. So what I'm going to do here is that if it hasn't been created, and it won't have been created if this is the first time, I'll say connection equals new promise. This takes a resolve and a reject. And I'm going to say Mongoose connect, and I'll put my connection string here. You could also make this a environment variable, but this is going to be MongoDB localhost, and I'm just going to call this foobar_db. Now this has a callback. You would think that this would be thenable. I don't think it is at this point. But once we end up getting in here, we can resolve and simply resolve. At this point, we would be connected. So again, the thing that I want you to see here, I want you to really get comfortable with these promises, is here I'm creating a new promise, and that's what I'm going to return from here. So it's only going to end up connecting to the database one time, right? So if I haven't actually created this promise, I create the promise and I return the promise. If I've created the promise, I just return the promise. And again, my expectation is that I'll be able to connect to the database, which will be the case unless for some reason you don't have Mongo running. The other thing that I want to do here is I'm going to create my foo. So I'm going to say my foo schema. And let's actually start out with our bar schema, which is a little bit easier, which is going to be a Mongoose schema. This takes an object. And for this bar schema, we're going to specify we have a count, which is going to be a number, right? That was the only thing in our bar schema. And what we're going to do here is that we could actually go in here and create a bar model. We could say bar equals mongoose model, and this is going to be bar, and this is going to be bar schema. And we could go up here, and we could say we're also going to have a foo schema equals mongoose schema. And the way that it's going to work with a nested schema, we know that a bar has a name. We've done this already, right? We could say name is string. If we wanted to do an object, we can end up specifying an object here if we wanted to make it required or unique or one of those things. But I could also say that the foo schema has a bar, meaning that I'm nesting within this foo a bar. And I'm describing what this looks like by specifying that it's the bar schema. So the bar is going to be the bar schema. This is the bar schema that we have here. And now I could say foo equals mongoose model foo schema. And not only can I end up outputting the foo, but I could say bar, which is a legitimate model. So I've got two schemas and I've got two models. The key here is I've got one schema nested in another schema. And if I go to rerun my test, hopefully, let's just see what that looks like. Passes. It's great. So let's see what our database looks like. So I'm going to open up Mongo, and I'm going to say I'm going to use foo bar db, show collections. Okay? The thing that I want you to see is there's no bar collection. Okay? Just because you create a model doesn't mean necessarily that you have to have a collection for that model. So if I end up saying foos.find, the interesting thing here, db foos.find, what you see is this nesting. So the bar itself is going to have its own properties here. Okay, so it's an interesting thing. Now, I want to show you one other thing here. Let's actually do something else. When we go into our spec, nothing's wrong with going in here. Bar equals db models bar. And I'm going to go in here and just make sure that I'm cleared out. So I'm going to say return foo.remove. And when I'm done here, I'm going to go down here and say I'm done. And let's run it again, and let's just see what things look like. They should look pretty much the same. And we could go back here. And we can see we get the same result. We can see a different ID because things have cleared out. I just want to show you one other thing, because this is how things are set up in the workshop. That there would be nothing wrong with going over here and saying bar equals new bar, and bar has a count, right? So we could set up a new bar and say bar has a count of 10, let's say, right? So that's a bar object. And now, instead of specifying bar, I could say bar is equal to bar, right? That's a bar object, it's a nested object, and let's run this again. Okay, and the reason why that fails, makes sense, right? Because I set the count to 10. So let's change the count to 10. And I just want to show you one difference here. Still, if we go back here, the only difference here is that since I ended up creating it as a model, it ends up giving me an object ID. It doesn't mean I have to use that object ID. It's still got the same data that it had before. Okay? But the fact that we newed it up as a bar object, it ends up generating an object ID for us. Okay? So that's going to happen when you end up seeding your data. So I want you to be aware of it. The other thing here is, again, that the same way that in our workshop, we're actually not going to have a places collection. If I say show collections, right, we don't see any of the bars, but we do have a model called bar, and we are actually using that model. We're using it right here, but it's being nested inside here. And the only other thing, this is not even critical for the workshop at all, but just for kicks, let's say that I wanted to put some method inside the bar, say hi. Bar is going to have a say hi method, and that's going to be equal to hello. Right? If I went back here, right, my test failed because foo say hi is not a function, and I really didn't want foo to say hi. I could have done that. I actually want bar to say hi. And it's a model. I have the ability to do that. How do I do it? Same way you did it before. That bar is actually a model. So I could go to my bar schema. You could put statics on here. I'm going to say methods, say hi is equal to a function. And I'll return hello. And my tests end up passing. So again, I wanted to show you sort of with a basic example how nested schemas work, because you're going to use them for your workshop. And the next thing that I want to do is actually go into how the seeding is going to get set up and how things can be a little bit different than the way that they're set up in the workshop, I think, which will make your life a little bit easier.